What is 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 6? If you answered 9, then you are right. By the end of our time here together, we will be able to describe the Catalyst 9000 line of switches. Once upon a time, Cisco had Catalyst 2Ks and 3Ks and 4Ks and 6Ks, and they've taken all of those lines of switches and effectively combined them into one line of switches we call the Catalyst 9Ks or Catalyst 9000s. So in this video, we're going to explore all the different families of switches that exist inside that Catalyst 9000 line. The Catalyst 9000s bring with it several new innovations into the switching space. First of all, from a hardware perspective, this is based on that Unified Access Data Plane ASIC technology that we've mentioned. This is a programmable ASIC, which means that we can go in there after it's been deployed and reconfigure it. And the best example I can give of this is that we had an early version of the UADP in the 3850 switches. Except when the 3850 switches launched, they didn't support MPLS and they didn't support VXLAN. Well, we needed those features to be deployed, and so Cisco was able to release essentially a software update, a patch for the UADP that enabled MPLS and VXLAN in hardware. In other words, the 3850s now support VXLAN and MPLS at line rate, even though they didn't support it at all when they first released. That's the advantage of having programmable hardware. Now, interestingly, this also runs on an x86 architecture. That would be from a CPU processing perspective. And the reason that's significant has to do with the software conversation. From a software perspective, we run iOS-XE. This is Cisco's iOS operating system running as a software instance on a Linux kernel. And what this allows in combination with the x86 processor is to run third-party applications on the switch. So for example, we might be able to run one day an application that goes out and sniffs my network traffic for me. In fact, Cisco was so interested in supporting applications running on the switches that they allowed for USB connectivity for additional storage. So you could actually plug in a USB drive into one of these switches to give it more storage space for the deployment of these applications. Now there are 5 different families of Catalyst 9K switches that we need to discuss. We have the 9200s, 9300s, 9400s, 9500s, and 9600s. Now let's start off by talking about the 9300s because we can expect to see a lot of these in deployments. The 9300s are stackable switches and they're modular. They have modular uplinks. They are designed to be deployed at the fabric edge in order to be those fabric edge nodes that we talked about in the last skill. Now the reason I started with the 9300 is again that we expect to see a lot of 9300s out in the field. However, Cisco did release the 9200s to be a lower scale version of the 9300s, in other words, a lower end switch to meet lower end budgets. These are stackable switches, but again, their overall feature set is lower grade. For example, we don't run the full UADP in this platform, we have a UADP Mini which has more limited feature set. Now both the 9200 and 9300s have L versions of these switches, and these are just lower grade switches within the family of products. So if you're going to procure an L version of a switch, make sure you're aware of the limitations of that platform before you commit to purchasing them, even though the price tag might look more appealing than a non-L version. Now the 9400s are a chassis switch, and while we can't physically stack these with each other, Cisco does support a technology called Stackwise Virtual that runs on the 9400s. This has the rough equivalent of the virtual switching system, or VSS, that Cisco has run on other platforms, but the protocol and the underlying technology is different. The theory is that one day we can run more than 2 switches at a time on Stackwise Virtual, even though as of the time of this video, Cisco only supports 2, even with Stackwise Virtual. Now the 9500s are a fixed configuration switch. They do allow for some amount of modularity, but they're not chassis and they're not stackable. But we can run Stackwise Virtual connectivity, so we can virtually stack these with other 9500s. And last but not least, the 9600s are also chassis switches that support Stackwise Virtual. Now let's say today in your environment you have the traditional Catalyst 2Ks and 3Ks in your infrastructure. What would we want to replace those switches with based on these new series of switches? Well, the 9200s were designed to replace the Catalyst 2Ks. So if we have those 2960X switches out there, that would be a great place to install the 9200s where you once had Catalyst 2Ks. The 9300s are going to be a Cat 3K replacement. So anywhere where you had 3850s or 3650s, or potentially if you still have 3750Xs out there, this would be the switch you want to look at in order to replace those. The 9400s are chassis switches, and these would be around those Cat 4Ks. Are you noticing a pattern here? 9200s, Cat 2Ks, 9300s, Cat 3Ks, 9400s, Cat 4Ks. So we're kind of sensing the pattern here. And by the way, these three, whether it's 9200, 9300, or 9400, these would be considered edge switch technologies. So we think about the SDA topology, and we know we have fabric edge nodes. These are the platforms that Cisco designed to be at the edge, even though we could repurpose them in other roles, and we'll see that here in a few moments. Now we've noticed our pattern here, but there is no Cat 5 case, so let's skip that for a moment. The 9600s are indeed intended to be a replacement for the Cat 6 Ks. So what are the 9500s designed to replace? Well, for those who have the 4500X platform out there, or possibly the smaller Cat 6K platforms like the 6880X, these platforms were smaller core switches, and the 9500s were designed to replace those solutions. As such, these two platforms are designed to be core switches. So now that we know about these different families of switches, what roles do they play in an SDA fabric? Well, in order to find that out, we need to go out and look at Cisco's active documentation. And so what I recommend is we start at google.com and we search for Cisco SDA Compatibility Matrix. So let's go ahead and hit enter here. And what we should find is that the first link will take us to Cisco's compatibility matrix. It's where they show what platforms can serve and what roles in an SDA fabric. So we'll start to scroll down here, and this is arranged a little bit curiously. For example, over here on the left, this is what we need to look for, and all the way down here is fabric edge. So this entire section here on the right, if we scroll all the way up, from this long line down to this long line down here, these would be all of the platforms that Cisco supports as a fabric edge node. For example, we see the Catalyst, let me scroll up a little more. Here we go. For example, we do see the Catalyst 9200s, the 9300s we talked about, 9300Ls, we mentioned those, 9400s, 9500s. So even the core switches can actually serve as a fabric edge node, which is interesting. Now, if we keep scrolling down here, we won't see the 9600s on here, although we will see the 3850s and 3650s, because even though they didn't support VXLAN, for example, when they first released, Cisco was able to add VXLAN after the fact using that UADP ASIC. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, let me clear this cookie warning out. We should see on the left here fabric, border, and control plane nodes. So now we're going to find out that most of these switches will actually support being border nodes and control plane nodes. For example, the 9300s, although we do have to pay attention and make sure whatever model we want to use is in the list, as well as the software level that we need to maintain. So as we scroll down here, we're going to find that the 9400s are still on here, the 9500s, I'm not sure why the 94s are after the 9500s, but either way, you keep scrolling down here, we see the 9600s. So the 9600s are capable of being part of the fabric, they're just only capable of being border and control plane nodes. But either way, come out to this website and make sure you do the Google search to find the Cisco SDA Compatibility Matrix and do the research yourself before procuring hardware. And with that, you're now able to describe the Catalyst 9000 line of switches. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.